Every time you make an excuse, blame someone else, or just don't think about it, your brain is running one of these. Defense mechanisms are the unconscious tricks your mind uses to protect itself from things too painful to face directly. Here's every single one, explained. Repression. Repression pushes a painful thought, memory, or impulse out of conscious awareness entirely, without you ever noticing it happened. Unlike actively trying to forget something, repression works silently in the background, burying it before it ever reaches the surface. Denial. Denial refuses to accept a painful reality even when the evidence is right in front of you. Where repression hides the thought from you, denial looks straight at the truth and simply rejects it. Suppression. Suppression is the conscious cousin of repression, deliberately choosing to push a thought aside for now, planning to deal with it later. It's the only defense mechanism on this list that you're actually aware you're doing. Projection. Projection takes an unacceptable feeling inside you and pins it onto someone else instead. The jealous partner who constantly accuses their partner of cheating is often projecting their own guilt outward. Displacement. Displacement redirects an emotion toward a safer target than the one that actually caused it. You can't yell at your boss, so you snap at your family the moment you get home. Reaction formation. Reaction formation flips an uncomfortable impulse into its exact opposite. Someone who feels deep insecurity might overcompensate by acting loudly confident, almost as a mask facing outward. Rationalization. Rationalization builds a logical-sounding excuse to justify a choice that was actually driven by emotion. I didn't get the job because they wanted someone less qualified sounds reasonable, and that's exactly the point. Regression. Regression retreats to an earlier, more childlike way of coping when the present moment feels too overwhelming. Adults under extreme stress sometimes revert to behaviors, sulking, tantrums, clinging, they outgrew decades earlier. Sublimation. Sublimation channels a raw, unacceptable impulse into something productive and socially valued instead. Aggression turned into competitive sport is the textbook example. The energy doesn't disappear, it just changes shape. Intellectualization. Intellectualization strips the emotion out of a painful event by focusing only on cold facts and logic. A person describing their own diagnosis purely in clinical statistics, with zero emotional language, is often intellectualizing their fear. Compartmentalization. Compartmentalization keeps two contradictory parts of life in separate, sealed-off mental boxes so they never have to confront each other. Someone can hold values they constantly violate at work without ever feeling the conflict, because the two areas never touch in their mind. Identification. Identification absorbs the traits, attitudes, or behaviors of someone else as a way to feel safer or more powerful. A child who mimics an admired adult is using identification to borrow a sense of strength they don't yet have themselves. Introjection. Introjection takes identification one step further by fully internalizing another person's voice, rules, or judgment as if it were your own inner monologue. The harsh inner critic many people carry is often a parent's old voice, introjected years ago. Undoing. Undoing performs a small symbolic act to mentally cancel out a guilty thought or action. Apologizing excessively for a minor mistake, far beyond what the situation calls for, is a common form of undoing. Isolation of effect. Isolation of effect separates the facts of an event from the feelings attached to it, so the memory exists without any emotional charge. Someone can recount a traumatic event in flat, detached detail, as if reading a news report about a stranger. Splitting. Splitting sorts people or situations into all good or all bad categories, with no room for nuance in between. The same person can be idolized one day and completely condemned the next, with no memory of the version in between. Acting out. Acting out expresses an internal conflict through impulsive behavior instead of acknowledging the feeling behind it. A tantrum, a reckless decision, or a sudden outburst can all be the mind discharging tension it refuses to name directly. Avoidance. Avoidance simply steers clear of any person, place, or situation that might trigger the uncomfortable feeling in the first place. Unlike denial, avoidance doesn't reject the threat. It just refuses to get close enough to face it. Humor. Humor diffuses a painful or threatening truth by turning it into a joke before it can land emotionally. Self-deprecating jokes about a real insecurity often do double duty, deflecting others while keeping the speaker from feeling it fully. Altruism. Altruism resolves an inner conflict by redirecting focus onto helping someone else with the exact problem you can't face in yourself. Therapists and counselors who were drawn to the field after their own unresolved struggles are a well-documented example of this pattern. Most of these run completely under the radar. You won't catch yourself mid-defense mechanism. But once you know the list, you start spotting them everywhere. In arguments, in excuses, in the story you tell yourself about why things went wrong. Subscribe for the next full picture.